Welcome back to the Heritage Museum with St. Charles County Parks Department. My name is Kristine Madras, Program Coordinator for St. Charles County Parks, and we're bringing you another artifact spotlight today. Now, we have many interesting items here in our collections at the museum, but one of the questions that we get the most is actually about the history of the house here at the museum. So that's what we're going to focus on for this spotlight today. The history behind the families that owned the historic house here at the museum. So join me today as we discover more about the history of the Heritage Museum.
Now, the history of this property actually starts much earlier than the Cribbins story. It begins in 1796 with Tussaud Surrey. Surrey was actually the original grant owner for this property. It's not until several years later that the Cribbins come into the picture. In 1844, they come to St. Charles, Missouri from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Lawrence and his wife Eliza were both Irish immigrants that came to St. Charles County in 1844 with their son William. Lawrence purchased the land in 1851 for William and Nancy Douglas for $4,500. The Cribbins ran a stock and grain farm, which was also referred to as Cedar Grove at the time. The Cribbins family were slave owners according to an 1860s slave census record and owned 3 at the time. The land was large, as can be seen from this depiction from an 1875 Missouri plat book. Lawrence owned his own boat landing on the Missouri River. He used it for shipping his grain and livestock to markets in St. Charles. His farm intersected Boone's Lick Road, which provided a route to the western Missouri cities and markets.
William also lived here at the house and took over the property after his father's death in 1877. Now, William also held the site until the next family that we're just about to talk about. They are the Coleman family. Now, the Coleman family comes into the picture in 1897, and the property under the Coleman family was quickly known as Coleman Groves. The Colemans were well known for letting the public come onto the property and have picnics underneath all of the lush trees in their grove, and also the public would have leisure activities like baseball games right in front of the house. Now, it became very much known as a place where the public could just kind of come and relax. Mr. Coleman was a very well-respected member of society. He died in 1927 and left some of the property to his daughter, Carolyn Iborg, the house as well, and some of the property to his grandson, Irwin Ellman. Now, after Carolyn passed away, all of the house and the property belonged to Irwin Ellman. Now, the property belonged to the Coleman family until 1975. Irwin Ellman sold the property to developers, and that is when you started to see the neighborhood being built up around, but they also purchased the house. And the house became known as a pretty well-known restaurant of the time period, Mr. Cribbins' Old House Restaurant.
Mr. Cribbins' Old House Restaurant was started in 1980 and was in business until around 1986. After the restaurant closed, the building was used as office space. In 2006, St. Charles County Parks took over the building and renovated it into the Heritage Museum, which opened in 2010. The museum has in its collections a large amount of objects and other archival materials that belonged to the Coleman and Iborg family.
So we're back inside here at the Heritage Museum, and I'm excited to show you some of the items that we have in our collections that relate to the Coleman Iborg families. Now, the house is a beautiful piece of work and of architecture, but it's not that makes a house a home. It's the families that walked through the doors. So we're going to go into a little bit more depth about the Coleman and Iborg families. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about today is this portrait of Fritz and Anna Coleman. Now, Fritz was born in 1851 in Germany, and we believe he came over to the United States around 1871. Now, Anna here was born in St. Louis in 1859. After Fritz comes over from Germany, the two meet, and they get married in 1881. The couple has 3 children. However, much like many families in the mid and early 19th century, not all of their children survived past them. Only one did, and that was Carolyn. And we'll talk about her in just a little bit here. Now, some of the items that we have associated with this couple is Fritz's hat here. And then also, this is one of my favorite items that belonged to Anna. Now, this is a sash. It's a dark red sash that has little gold deer on it. And she wore this with her wedding dress in 1881. So these items just kind of show you a little bit more about the personality of these two. Now, this photograph here depicts Carolyn and her husband, Fred Iborg. Now, Carolyn and Fred did not have any children. However, they did adopt their nephew, Erwin Ellman. Now, Erwin Ellman, his parents tragically died in the 1920s. And so Carolyn and Fred adopted their nephew, but they did not change the last name. Now, with this portrait, we also have the hat that also belonged to Carolyn Iborg. So you can kind of imagine her wearing this on Sunday outings, evenings, maybe a drive on a Sunday, which kind of correlates with the portrait that we have here. Now, this is of the Iborg and Coleman families as well. It's a portrait that's been colored in a bit. Now, these have been in the collections for several years, and this is just a few of the items that we have that relate to the Coleman family. So if you have any other questions about the house or the items that we have here, please feel free to call the museum. We'd be happy to help you out. And thank you for joining me for another Artifact Spotlight, and have a nice day.